and hit the welcome everybody to the concluding webinar from the TuneOurBlock projects on the learnings from the TuneOurBlock project. We are here today with a group of speakers from the TuneOurBlock project consortium. TuneOurBlock is a 3-year research and development project that is now concluding. And we spent the last 3 years on mainstreaming and diversifying the Superblock concept for cities across Europe. We have done several activities, engaging in basic research, engaging in applied research in cities with living lab approaches, and also engaging in knowledge transfer and capacity building activities. And today, we want with you, the interested participants, show you and discuss with you some of the main findings, the key messages, and also the proceedings from the project. I can see from the participants that there are some people joining us who have been with us before, some other people who are joining new. Which is great, and we are very happy over the last 3 years that we were able to also build a network of actors and stakeholders that are engaged in the implementation and lobbying for Superblocks and Superblock-like projects for transformative urban change. And so this is a conclusion. It's a happy last event of our project, and we are looking forward to also hear your thoughts. So to all the participants, one housekeeping thing is that please, if you have questions that you want to ask for the presentations, use the Q&A box in the bottom of the Zoom mask, and we will have throughout the webinar, we will have 3 sort of time windows so that we can answer your questions that you have. Let me briefly introduce or list the speakers that we have today. We have Lisa Ruoth from the German Institute of Urban Affairs and the TuneOurBlock consortium. We have Valentina Haas from the Changing Cities Citizen organization, also from the TuneOurBlock consortium, Nicolina Kirby from the Research Institute for Sustainability in Potsdam, Valentin Gebhardt from the City of Vienna, the Urban Development and Planning Department, Ulrich Leth, who is just now on the large image from Vienna University of Technology, Georg Wieser from Laut Landscape Architecture and Urban Transformation, and Victoria Schandor from AIT, the Austrian Institute of Technology. Myself, my name is Florian Lorenz. I'm also from Laut Landscape Architecture and Urban Transformation, and I'm guiding today through the webinar. And without further ado, I want to ask Lisa for an introductory presentation. She will show us what TuneOurBlock has been about in the main streaks, and just so that you get a feel for what is happening afterwards, we will basically have this general introduction. Then we will have 2 presentations on Berlin, and then we will have a Q&A session on the first input block. Then we will turn to Vienna, the second city where we had living labs, and 2 presentations from Vienna. We will again have a Q&A block. And then finally, but most importantly, Ulrich will present some of the key findings from the TuneOurBlock project, and we will then thereafter have again a Q&A session. So yeah, Lisa, please share your presentation with us.
Thanks, Flo. Welcome from my side as well. As Flo said, my name is Lisa Ruoth. I'm head of the team of urban and regional mobility here at the German Institute of Urban Affairs. We are a research institution from the German municipalities, and we conduct applied research on different, all sorts of different topics which are relevant to municipalities, and specifically also on transport and mobility issues. And we also regularly conduct seminars and knowledge transfer formats, especially for the German municipalities. So we are a very sort of practical oriented research institution. And we don't so often have international formats. So I'm really glad today to have an international audience and to present some insights or to present the project TuneOurBlock. So let me share my screen. I hope this works now. Sorry. Okay. There we are. So TuneOurBlock is a project funded in the context of the joint program initiative Urban Europe. So it's funded by funds from the European Commission in collaboration with different national funding institutions that you can see here. And it's a project which brings together different research and practical actors from Austria, Germany, and Slovenia. And as Flo already mentioned, there are both research organizations in the consortium, as well as municipalities and practical players, as well as one NGO. So it's a very transdisciplinary project approach. And a key element of the project are 2 urban living labs, as we call them, one in Vienna and one in Berlin. So we engaged in depth with those 2 sort of case studies where we very much got involved with the practical actors on the ground. And this was combined methodologically with an international so-called municipal peer group, where we brought together actors from different municipalities all over Europe. And I'm listing some here, which were sort of the core municipal peer groups: so Amsterdam, Barcelona, Brussels, Rotterdam, London, Ghent, Lodz, Ljubljana, and of course, Vienna and Berlin. And during the course of the project, because there was a big resonance sort of on the international municipal peer group meetings that we did, there were also other cities who sort of spontaneously joined this this exchange format. So what is the project about? As you can see, the key word that we use is the term Superblock. And what do we understand, or what do we mean with this terminology of a superblock? Probably most who participate today have an understanding and are aware of how this idea of superblock implementation during the last few years sort of became like a wave that spread across different cities in Europe. Barcelona is very much the birthplace of this approach, but it has also spread, for example, to Berlin, for example, to Vienna, but also to many other cities around Europe. And to sort of sum up, or to pinpoint the key aims of Superblock implementation, we can say it's key, the idea to reduce through traffic, basically by dividing a part of the road grid or the street grid into separate blocks, and to make sure that within those blocks through traffic is no longer possible, and instead access for walking and cycling is improved by different sort of infrastructural measures, but also by the traffic calming effect. And at the same time, the room, the public space, which formerly was mostly reserved for cars, is gradually transformed to create more room for playing, for sports, for different kinds of leisure activities. So basically to reinvent the public space by reducing the use of cars, and to make room for different alternative activities. There are also other elements of or other aims that are connected to this type of measure. So to improve traffic safety, of course, especially of vulnerable groups such as pedestrians and children, but also superblocks are often connected to aims of to improve climate adaptation. So to make room, literally make room for measures to have better management of rainwater, for example, but also to mitigate the effects of urban heat islands, all of which are very much intensified by parking cars and by a lot of asphalt. So very often superblock measures are also connected to redesigning literally the urban space to make room for more green, for more trees, and for more places where water can go into the ground. Also, another dimension which in many cases is very central is to improve health of citizens, which is also, of course, closely connected to the quality of the urban space and, for example, to the access to greenery and to the ability to use, for example, to use cycling every day. So there are a lot of direct benefits of the Superblock approach and also indirect sort of co-benefits connected to this approach. And this is why one reason why it has become so popular in recent years in many cities. So the research questions connected to Superblocks in the context of TuneOurBlock were, among others, to make a bit more clear what is special and specific about the Superblock approach, because of course, traffic calming measures have been implemented for decades in many European cities. So there is a long tradition, but the project took at its starting point to say, yes, but superblocks are sort of a thing of its own. They take traffic calming literally a step further. How is the concept of superblocks interpreted in different national as well as local contexts? So the underlying observation was that obviously superblocks are not implemented in the same way in different cities. Instead, it seems to be an inspiration and a reference point, but there are many different nuances that we can see. And TuneOurBlock had the aim of making this more clear and looking in depth at different types of implementation. Which strategies for the implementation of superblocks are being applied. So again, we can see that different cities in different countries are going about this type of project in different ways. And we looked at this more closely in the project. Which role does participation of citizens play? We're going to hear more about this later. Which recommendations can be given for the successful implementation of superblocks, and especially also for the upscaling of superblocks, because we realized early on that, especially when we look at Barcelona, we can see superblocks are a citywide concept at a very large scale, whereas in most other cities, at the moment, we have a quite sort of limited local focus often of the implementation. So the question is, how can this type of approach be upscaled? And also, what can European municipalities learn from each other when it comes to implementing superblocks? So let me just quickly introduce the two urban living labs that we had and which we are going to come back to in much more detail later on. So in Berlin, the term for superblock is translated or reinvented as the term Kiezblocks, with Kiez meaning a living quarter or a part of the city. And in this urban living lab, we used two main approaches. On the one hand, we organized a dialogue process between different municipal authorities within Berlin, because Berlin obviously is a very large city, and superblocks initiatives have been popping up in different parts of the city. So we brought these different players together to discuss sort of what are the common challenges that they face and what can they learn from each other. And also there was an in-depth study on one of those Kiezblock projects in the so-called Grefe Kiez, which Nicolina Kirby is going to present later on. And this focused very much on the role of participation in the process of implementation. Living Lab in Vienna, the main focus was on the so-called Lichtental neighborhood, where, inspired by the by the first Kiezblock in Favoriten, a local initiative started to demand a Superblock for their own neighborhood, and the approach here to conduct a kind of participatory research in collaboration with this bottom-up initiative. The idea was to support the work of the citizens by creating, for example, relevant planning documents and communication materials, and sort of developing and devising Superblock strategies in a co-creative way. And we're going to hear more. And all of these different approaches, or the learnings from Vienna and Berlin, were brought together in the course of the project in the dialogue and exchange process within the municipal peer group, where other cities, for example, I'm showing here London or Barcelona, also brought in their experiences, and we try to sort of extract some of the main learnings about how Superblocks can be implemented successfully, and are currently working on a brochure which will publish those main findings. So thanks for the moment.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I would say we jump then into the Berlin Living Lab. And we'll hear from Valentina Haas from Changing Cities, an NGO from Berlin, about the Kiezblocks campaign that is quite transformative for the city. So,
yeah, thanks, Flo. I'm also going to share my screen with you. So, hello from my side as well. My name is Valentina, and I work as a campaigner for the NGO Changing Cities. We are an organization based in the transport sector and more livable cities. And one of our biggest projects or campaigns is the Kiezblock campaign. And as Lisa already said, Kiez means neighborhoods in Berlin. So we call Superblocks Kiezblocks. For you to understand what we're talking about, I brought you a map of Berlin. Each colored field here marks a citizen initiative for a Superblock in the neighborhood. In total, it's 70 initiatives all over Berlin. So how did we get there? We started back in 2020, where also the pandemic played quite a big role, because due to the pandemic, more and more attention was paid to the public space in total, and people became more open-minded for pop-up infrastructure, for example, parklets or play streets, as you can see in the picture. So yeah, I would say the pandemic and the year 2020 was kind of the starting point for our campaign. We then organized lots of events where people could plan their own neighborhood as a Superblock. Here you can see pictures as well. And since we crashed into the pandemic, lots of these events also took place online, but it still worked out very well and people showed up. An important document for our work is our How to Kiezblock. You can see it on the right. It's basically a step-by-step guideline on how to build up an initiative. And it helped us to share our knowledge among the activists and to spread the idea of Kiezblocks and how to make Kiezblocks a grassroots thing. And then, of course, we also did lots of press work. And slowly the newspaper, they took up the term Kiezblock, which was a huge success because we were the ones who introduced that term Kiezblocks. It didn't exist before. And we brought it into the political debate. And I think what has been key to all of this is that we as Changing Cities, we understand ourselves as a support structure for the residents that want to change something in their neighborhood. So we try to supply them, to say so, with everything that they need to lobby for Superblocks, for Kiezblocks. We have a second important document besides the How to Kiezblock. In German, it's called Empfehlungen für Superblocks. In English, Recommendation for Superblocks. We realized that everyone was talking about Kiezblocks, but also the term was used in an inflationary way. So we thought, okay, we need to define what is a Kiezblock. So we decided to set up a group of experts. It was activists, people from universities, etc., and wrote down standards for Superblocks. It also exists in English now. So if you're interested, you can write me an email and I'll send it to you in English. In German, it's on our website already. Yeah, and it's supposed to be a guide for our activists, but mainly also for administrations. It's supposed to help them to build up Superblocks. One of our key instruments in lobbying for Superblocks is means of direct democracy. In Berlin, there's a thing called Einwohnerinnenantrag. Here you have to collect 1,000 signatures. And this was key for us to build a pressure on politicians. And here, for example, you can see one of the groups handing over their signatures to political decision makers. Of course, what has also been important is that we're taking the idea of Kiezblocks to the streets. It's not only lobbying, collecting signatures, it's also organizing events. For example, in front of the city hall, or also during street parties, as you could see in one of the previous pictures. And then beginning last year, we decided that we want to move further. And we launched a nationwide Superblock network beyond Berlin. And here you can see a picture of our nationwide Superblock conference, the very first in Germany, took place in Darmstadt last November. And until today, around 30 initiatives have joined our German-wide Superblock network. And we're excited on what's coming next. Thanks from my side. I'm handing over to Nicolina.
Thank you very much, Valentina. Just a brief note in between. If the participants have questions, you can already write them into the Q&A box in the Q&A mask below. We will then answer them after Nicolina's presentation. So next up is Nicolina Kirby from the Research Institute for Sustainability in Potsdam, and she will show us some methodological insights that were worked out in our project.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much. Yes, I'm Nicolina Kirby, and I'm a researcher at the Research Institute, RIFS in Potsdam. And most of my work focuses on participation, especially in the context of urban transformations. And for this, I am also going to share my screen with you and tell you a bit more about the learnings that we gathered from our urban living lab, Gräfekiez, with the focus on communication, conflicts, and participation. I am going to start this presentation with a few words about communication, conflicts, and participation in general. Also, just because I'm not sure what the general baseline of knowledge is, so just a few words on that. First, about general fields of conflict and participation processes. So we have conflicts about things like space redistribution, about safety, especially traffic safety, about the perceived loss of freedom or perceived gain of freedom. We're talking about different fears, the feeling of not being listened to by other people, and also talking about the issue of gentrification. So when we're talking about the need to participate, it is especially these different fields of conflict that we need to keep in mind and that we've been talking about. Which actors do we have in such processes, or which actors should we be aware of when we're trying to implement such a superblock, for example? Obviously administration and politics, local business owners, normal residents, schools and kindergartens, emergency services, waste collection, all of these. Active civil society, we saw the example of Changing Cities and the initiative, so people like these, but also groups that are very much against measures, for example, especially eclectic groups, and academia can play a role as well, I would say. So what different types of participation formats do we have, or what are different approaches towards participation? And we can have an approach that is more about informing people. We can have approaches that are very open. We can have more dialogue-oriented formats, more collaborative formats, or specifically outreaching formats. And these formats are not exclusive to each other, but quite often one format is a multiple of these different ones. When do these formats make sense? Informing formats generally when things have already been decided upon, and nothing will happen after or nothing will necessarily change after the event. An open format makes sense when we're at the beginning of the process, where many things are still open for discussion. And it's also a way to reach as many people as possible because, for example, there's no need to register for an event. Dialogue-oriented formats make a lot of sense when the context is quite polarized, when we have many groups with different needs within a neighborhood, and these formats can be quite consultative as well, for example, when administrations need that. The collaborative process is usually dialogue-oriented, but goes a step further because it kind of has empowerment of the citizens and of the participants in mind, and makes a lot of sense of the process, and especially the outcome of the process is quite open, and where you also have an engaged civil society or a group of people there who are also willing to cooperate and collaborate. And outreaching formats are usually applied when we have a context where people are quite difficult to reach or difficult to engage with. So what are examples of this? Informing formats are things like information events, information tables, flyers, usually quite broad level, quite low level, like to enter, and also quite broad. Open formats can be, for example, an open fishbowl discussion in the neighborhood. It can be the classical town hall meeting. But it can also be digital platforms where everybody is able to contribute, for example. Dialogue-oriented formats can be, for example, citizen assemblies. They can be workshops featuring workshops. They can be focus groups. They can be world cafes. Collaborative formats are usually also workshops with specific end goals in mind, and can also be more long-term collaboration between different actors, for example, between civil society and administrative actors. And outreaching formats can also be information stalls, but also visiting people in their spaces instead of expecting people to come to your participation event, and also working with multipliers in the neighborhood who are knowledgeable of the difficult to reach groups within the neighborhood. So yeah, those were just a few words about participation in general. And next up, I'm going to tell you a bit more about our Urban Living Lab Gräfekiez. And I think the case is quite interesting. Maybe, as a very first point, Gräfekiez is not defined as a Kiezblock. So in the Gräfekiez, the project is not called a Kiezblock, mainly because the Gräfekiez is officially already traffic calmed, but cars were still driving too fast. And the idea here was to go a step further to actually kind of enforce the traffic calming that had already been implemented. and to also increase the livability of the space and to increase the attractiveness of stay there. And that was done in a cooperation project that was implemented by the local district administration of Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg, and then mostly guided and supported by the Berlin Social Science Research Center. And then different civil society and research organizations joined in trying to find different participatory process to help the process. And we from the RIFs were part of this consortium trying a participatory format within this context. And the whole process was evaluated through a survey that was conducted before the measures were implemented, and then also after the measures had been implemented for 6 months to kind of see what the results were. And I think we have first results now. Generally, the results are quite positive, and the changes, they were meant to be temporary, and the changes are now going to stay. So they're going to be made permanent. Although right now it's unclear whether the changes will be extended or if we're just going to have the changes that we have now. So what were the changes and what was the Urban Living Lab? You have a little map here, and it shows the area that was the initial project area where street space was supposed to be redesigned. The idea was initially to redesign all parking spaces in this area. That didn't happen. And then in the end, the idea was to repurpose all parking space in this yellow area of this project space. And that kind of happened. Not all parking spaces in this area were repurposed, but I think 30 to 40 parking spaces were. And what happened with these parking spaces was that they were either unsealed and were used as green spaces, are being used as urban gardening spaces that are being taken care of by residents. But some of these were also reused by putting parklets on them, for example, or things like an open classroom. So just different uses of how to, different ideas of how to reuse the space. There was also a Yelby station set up, and that's basically just a shared mobility station where all different kinds of shared mobility services can be put into one place. And residents were given the option to use a nearby parking structure to park their cars, although that option wasn't taken up a lot. What did it look like? I just have 2 examples here that were taken by Paper Planes, an NGO that conducted a participatory process, just to kind of show what it looks like. On the right, we have a picture of a former parking space that was unsealed, and at that point was just being turned into an urban gardening space. And as you can see there, that was the beginning of the process, but you can kind of get an idea what the changes look like. And on the left-hand side, you can see a top view of what one of the street looks like now. All the trees were there before, obviously, so you can see it was quite a nice area beforehand already. And then, basically all the area with the building side banners is where the space was redesigned. So you can get an idea of what the streets there look like now. So now coming to the different participation formats that were tried out in the process, and we had several. One was conducted by the NGO Paper Planes, and what they did, they had on-site information hours, and they were on-site in the area for 3 hours, I think, each Wednesday from May to September last year. And they were there basically with an information stall. They had a big map, and people were just able to walk by to talk to them, get some information about the project, and then were also able to place comments, recommendations, problems on the map that were then later digitalized. They also did some other workshops, but that was like their main participation format. And as you can see, this format was not just like one type of thing, but it was an outreaching format because it basically enabled everyone who wanted to join, because it was out on the streets and not in a closed space. It was dialogue oriented. It gave information, but it was also there to engage with the people, and the format was quite open because anybody who wanted to participate could participate. Another interesting format was the Kiezlabor, or the neighborhood lab, and that was basically a prototype that was designed by Berlin's City Lab, and it's a container space that was put on parking spaces, on the one hand to show what these parking spaces could look like if they were being reused, and then on the other hand contained lots of different different installations, for example, like environmental art installations, and it was a space where different workshops could be held. It was also a space where children who drew pictures of the neighborhood were able to then use an AI-based tool to then turn these pictures into like real-life graphics. And the people from the Kiezlabor were there for 2 weeks, and throughout these 2 weeks, they did all sorts of different formats to engage with all sorts of different citizens. So also an outreaching format, very dialogue-oriented, open, but also informing at the same time. Then we had 2 citizen science projects in the area that were about measurement of noise and measurement of air quality. And in these projects, residents from the area were able to volunteer to participate in the project, and then put sensor boxes outside of their windows or on their balconies to measure changes in air quality and also measure changes in noise that happened throughout the process, and especially happened through the implementation of the different measures. Then there was a project with school kids called Sensor Kids. And that was really interesting. It was a participation format geared towards school children, and it was part of a school project week where the researchers were able to join for the whole week and basically have a week-long workshop where they tried different participatory formats with the kids. For example, they did work through the neighborhood, where the kids then had a Polaroid camera and took pictures of all the different areas in the streets that they liked, that they disliked, that they had certain feelings towards, took pictures of places that they used for certain things, to then later collect that and then also talk about things that they liked and things that they didn't like. And once the changes were implemented, also talk about how the space changed, which was a really interesting format because children obviously have a very different view of the city compared to adults. So it was really interesting to get their perspective on the changes too. So here we also have a very outreaching and also kind of collaborative format, but also with a lot of informing value because they were being taught about what these changes do in the neighborhood as well once they were implemented. Then we also had focus groups with people from an ethnic minority background, people with mobility impairments, and with local business owners. And there the focus was mainly about what hinders them to participate in such processes. And this format was also partly outreaching and also dialogue oriented. And then we, from the RIFs, we conducted street interviews with local business owners to get their views on the project, and then also conducted a planning workshop with a group of these business owners that wanted to join to kind of see what they would like their space to change into in the future, especially because business owners have a lot of special needs and challenges when it comes to neighborhood transformations. So what were the challenges of these formats? There was a big problem with communication in the process, which was often perceived as too late and insufficient. Sometimes it was unclear whether the formats were about information or whether they were actually about empowerment and co-creation. And because we were many different actors involved in the process, it was sometimes difficult to communicate what is the actual room for participation and who can enable this. If we as researchers conduct a participatory format, we can't really enable the room for participation because we're not the administration who can then implement the change in the end, but we can only forward the recommendations. So that makes the role a bit difficult sometimes. And especially local business owners felt quite overlooked in their worries throughout the process. and were quite critical of the process, although they supported the end goals, which was a really interesting dynamic we had as well. And we also realized that lack of ownership in the process of the different organizations that participate can be quite challenging as well. However, what were our positive findings? Especially the visibility and those consultation hours on site reached a really broad mass, especially those that were difficult to reach, same as the other outreaching format that were implemented. And different formats to actually experience the transformation of the space, create new approaches for different people. We saw that especially in the Kiezlabor, where many different people then realized what it could look like, and where they reach like very old, very young people, people with no knowledge of the topic, and also people that had certain language barriers, for example. Then also we found out that there were a few loud ones in the process that were quite critical of it, but through these formats, we also managed to reach a quiet mass that was actually not so critical about it or supported it, and had a lot more nuanced view on the whole thing than is sometimes being portrayed in the media. School kids especially were very open towards change and also have a very different view on the neighborhood. So that's something really interesting to also keep in mind for future processes. And then in the end, focus groups can be quite helpful as well when we try to collect special needs and foster new coalitions as well within certain like specific stakeholder groups. So coming to the end, some general learnings that we can learn from this example: early, transparent and direct communications, using as many channels as possible is really necessary. So using online as well as offline channels. Participation should be understood as a process that includes different formats to reach different stakeholder groups and not just one event and then the participation for a process is done. We should also discuss what is negotiable and what is not, and then define the room for maneuver to, on the one hand, not create like some idealized version of people want at the end of a process that is done that we then can't implement in the end. But also discuss like what should be participated about and what not. Also participation could be target group specific and interlocking formats. They can enable a very broad and diverse participation. And looking at the aspect of transdisciplinary cooperation, which we had in this project, with different actors, can create resources for those different actors. So if research institutes, for example, conduct participatory processes that can create resources, but then also requires a lot of communication, clear division of roles, and also very clear division of responsibilities, but also ownership and the room for maneuver for the whole process, which is something that can be very challenging, but also very beneficial when done well. And that will be it. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nicolina. There is, yeah, it's really, it shows really how much has been done also, and over 3 years that there was really a lot of procedural learnings and insights that we could gain, but also that it's interesting because you can do things differently, but you have like similar methods, similar challenges, similar topics, themes. There is one first questions in the Q&A, but this one is dedicated for the Vienna case, so we'll keep that for the second Q&A block. I just wanted to ask the participants, if you have a question, just write it into the Q&A box in the bottom. Don't be shy. And we're happy for some questions to answer them as to the best of our knowledge. In the meantime, I had I was wondering, the interesting thing is like we hear a lot about each other's cases, but then there is always a few questions that come new. But for also maybe when we think about our listeners or participants, I have a question for Lisa, like for what these organized dialogues or Fachforen or like I don't know, professional forums. Like it's not for the general public, but it's for stakeholders that are municipal stakeholders, as I understood it. What was the dynamics with those events? What did you learn about then the barriers or the entry points for Superblock or Kiezblock implementation in Berlin?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So this in German it's called Fachforen, and it's really hard to translate, but the general idea of this format was to bring together the professional actors in the municipalities. So it's mostly people who are actually on the ground working on the implementation of Kiezblock projects, as well as things similar to Kiezblocks. And we did several meetings where these people came together from all different parts of Berlin, as I mentioned. And if I should pick out sort of one major theme that came up in terms of the challenges that they face when implementing Kiezblocks, in Germany, it seems to be particularly the regulatory framework of transport, which makes it hard to implement approaches such as Kiezblocks. We have quite a restrictive regulatory framework, which is historically very much geared towards supporting the car infrastructure and the use of private cars. And municipalities are quite restricted in how they can limit car traffic. And that is something that many municipalities are coming up against now, or have been coming up against in the last few years, when they try to implement sort of more progressive and a bit more experimental approaches of traffic calming. Now, this is something that probably in the details is specific to the German case, but of course other national contexts we can also see similar problems. But it was interesting to see how the different, I'm still looking for this term in English, Bezirk. What could be Bezirk in English?
This district.
A district, yeah, thanks. So how the different districts within the city handled this in different ways. So some interpreted the regulatory framework to say like, oh, we can hardly do anything in the form of Kiezblocks because there is a high probability that we will be sued and that we will lose in court because it's too risky what we are doing, while in other districts there was a much more sort of forward thinking and sort of courageous approach to the very same regulation. So they were saying, okay, we are going to try this and implement it, and then if we get sued, then maybe we get a decision by the court which gives us the legitimacy that we actually implemented it in the right way. So it was interesting to see how, in a way, the Superblock issue, at least in Berlin, is kind of a frontier issue where there is a lot of trial and error by the municipalities to try to push those regulatory frameworks. And this is particularly interesting also because now on the national level, as some of you may have heard, we're actually having a change also of this regulation. So a slightly progressive reform has actually been implemented, which in the future may make it somewhat easier for municipalities who have a good concept, a good overall concept, then to argue that they actually need to implement those measures and they're going to be legally much more sound. So we are going to see in Germany how this develops, how the municipalities actually can use this new reformed law of traffic. But it could mean that in the future we will see more Kiezblocks.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Very briefly, was there any district sued? Finally?
Yes, there were a few lawsuits going on. And I would need to look up which exactly got won or lost. But the most interesting thing was really this attitude of certain also leaders in those district administrations who were sort of saying, yes, this is a normal part of what we are doing. If we want to experiment, we may end up in front of the court, but this is not necessarily a bad thing, because it also leads to decisions, and then others can use this decision to go further. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, thank you. There was one question from the chat from Johannes Hofinger. He asks if there are any insights on how to accelerate the adoption and implementation of Superkizze or Kiezblocks or Superblocks. To me, it's not clear if you, Johannes, refer to the Berlin case or in general, but you also ask, for example, defining areas that are especially suitable for transformation, introduction of new processes in the municipal administration. Maybe we can ask it for the Berlin case. Was something like that happening over the last years? That sort of that areas were looked at, strategically, or was it all bottom up from residents brought, or is also the administration creating new processes in Berlin? Is something like that happening in Berlin, in the Berlin case?
Nicolina, do you?
Yeah, maybe I can quickly talk about two examples. So one is in Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg, and what they did there is that they're planning on rolling out district-wide traffic calming. They're not calling it Kiezblocks. There's district-wide traffic calming with the idea in mind that a lot of Kiezblock initiatives are in places where you have an active civil society, and they are often also places that are already quite nice, kind of like Gräfekiez. And the focus there was to look at the Umweltgerechtigkeitsatlas, which is a very long German word and what translated in an environmental justice map. So there's basically a map of Berlin, and they use different environmental justice indicators that overlap, and to kind of look in which areas of the district do these indicators overlap. So where's a very strong need for such district-wide traffic calming? And the approach there is to go into these areas as well as in areas where demands for Kiezblocks have been made to distribute it a bit more evenly. But as far as I know, I'm not sure how far the rollout is there, but that is one approach of how to how to deal with this without just like relying on Kiezblock initiatives.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I can add to that, Flo, that because the question I think was quite general. So which insights do we have from different sources? And I just wanted to mirror this a little bit with some insights from the international peer group meetings, where also a key point was often made that it's important to have clear indicators that you look at to say, okay, we want to improve, for example, the air quality, or we want to reduce through traffic by a certain amount through these measures. And this is exactly the approach that Nicolina also described for Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg. So very much a data-based approach. And this can be quite powerful because it has great political legitimacy, and you can very clearly argue what you actually want to improve. But on the other hand, I would say the Berlin case is also very indicative of how important this public support is. And of course, so probably if you look for the easiest place to implement a Kiezblock, it would be a place where there is great demand by the citizens living there who are supporting it. So Valentina, you probably would underline this, that of course, where we can actually see there is a sort of democratic will of the people, this also has a great legitimizing power. And in the case of Gräfekiez, which Nicolina mentioned, it was interesting that they did a representative survey of the whole district first, and they saw a big majority of people who supported quite radical traffic calming measures. And so there was this sort of objective measure saying, okay, people in the majority actually want this. So there are kind of like these two ways to do it.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are now that we have a little discussion going on, that's good. So please don't be so timid, dear audience. And of course, we are happy to answer your questions. I have a very brief question for Valentina, because Nicolina mentioned that it's important to clarify this room for participation, that the Handlungsfreiräume also, that when you engage with different stakeholders, you know. So I was interested in how do you do, or is that ever a subject or a topic when you run your campaigns in terms of expectation management, you know, because basically all these groups form in Berlin, and then they're like, yeah, we want to have a Kiez block, and then they maybe even 1,000 people come together in a neighborhood, and then it's in the municipality or in the administration then sometimes maybe not possible to do that as quickly as the citizens would expect, you know, because it's sort of a bottom-up project that could be assumed. So is there some of those dynamics happening, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's happening, of course. I would say, like, we as civil society or as initiatives, we understand ourselves as the ones that make the first step. And then it's up to the administrations to take over. So I think we are aware that we as changing cities are not the ones who will lead the whole process. And at some point we have to hand over and to give the responsibility. And yeah, I would say there's also like initiatives that are giving up. Of course, not all 70 initiatives that you could see on the map are still active. It does happen, but most of them keep fighting. And I would say that, like, for example, in the district of Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg, the one that Nicolina also mentioned, there we could see that there were so many initiatives that were all lobbying for Superblocks that the district said, okay, now we're going to make a concept for the whole district. And now we see that some initiatives, they are a bit disappointed because maybe in one of their neighborhoods in front of their homes, they don't. But the big goal of traffic calming in the whole district, that was reached. So yeah, so it's also, we also need to learn to deal with making, how do you say that? Kompromisse eingehen, making compromises, I would say.
Mm. Yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, I think this is a good sort of conclusion so far, or interim conclusion. Or Nicolina, do you want to add something? Of course.
Yes, maybe just very briefly. When I was speaking about the room for maneuver, it was mostly about like top-down participation processes like we did in Greifekiez. I think it's actually very important that civil society tries to expand this room for maneuver, because I mean, at the end of the day, it is like, I guess, variable to some extent. And I think if we didn't have civil society initiatives that are also demanding things that are maybe not possible now, but in the future, like that is what keeps the discourse going. So I think when we're looking at the bottom-up perspective, I'd be a bit more careful about the room for maneuver and try to expand it a bit more. So I think, and that's what they're doing. So I think that's something that's quite helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we'll also see in our new or our next block on Vienna how different stakeholders and different processes interact when it comes to Superblocks, or Superkretzel, as they are called in Vienna. And we'll hear first from Valentin Gebhardt. He works for the city of Vienna in the urban development and planning department on Vienna's Superkretzel pilot. The floor is yours, Valentin.
Yes, thank you very much, Florian. So maybe because it was also the question in the chat, and to make it clear in the beginning, kind of the project Supergresse Favoriten is not necessarily a result of TuneOurBlock itself. It was basically the same time when it was implemented, but it was a project, a pilot project by the city of Vienna. But of course, it's a project that's very important for TuneOurBlock because it's kind of the basis and an important object for analysis for the Viennese case, which is why I give a little bit of an input of what we did there as a city of Vienna and what we are doing right now with the Supergresse Favoriten. But before I start, I mean, we have heard it already from Lisa. It's really tough to call a superblock is always the same because there are a lot of differences. What we also realize. So when we implemented or when we started implementing the Supergresse Favoriten as the first superblock, we also had this thought of like, what is our understanding of the concept? What is the Supergrätsel, kind of like the translation of the superblock concept to the Viennese context? What is it? And we saw that it's, for us in Vienna, much more than just traffic calming and traffic safety. It's rather like considered as the answer or one of the answers for the climate crisis. So the focus is very much also on the reduction of urban heat island, upgrading the street space, and of course also creating a more sustainable mobility, and also in doing so, creating kind of an identity of the neighborhood, which is maybe not there. So our approach is maybe a bit more holistic than some other projects regarding superblocks that are mainly focusing only on traffic calming. So as I said before, Supergresse Favoriten is our pilot project in Vienna. It was the first, or it is the first superblock that is implemented right now. And as you have seen from our understanding, for the project area for this pilot project, we chose an area which is densely populated, where you have a high building density and also a high population density. It is an area where you have a lot of concrete, not a lot of green and trees within the streets, which is why there's a need for cooling measures within the area. And also we have several educational institutions. So the traffic calming and traffic safety aspect is something that's even more important within that area, maybe than somewhere else. And also this project was kind of embedded in another program by the city of Vienna called Vinoi Plus, which is an urban renewal initiative with a focus on social and ecological innovation. So we also got some synergies there. And the overall goal for implementing this pilot project is to bring more green into the area, to create more public spaces, and to have less traffic within this area. So this is a bit of an overview of what we did and what it's about to come within the area. So we started in 2021 with a kind of feasibility study, the Supergresse concept. Is it possible? How could it look like? Which mainly consisted of a traffic concept of the area, but also directly together with a public space concept, how this new public spaces could be used for the area. Then in 2022, we started with the pilot phase of the Superblock with the tactical and with temporary measures. And most of the traffic organization was already recreated for that time. Then 2023, we had a bridging phase because all the plans had to be done in detail. So we did a lot of activation activities in public space. We kept the greening measures and the plants, and we did some open air exhibition. And actually a few months ago now, we started with the first phase of the structural implementation. So that means now we really start to bring in the green of the area. So in this first phase, more than 40 new trees will be planted, and 4 intersections will also be redesigned. And then there will be another phase of the structural implementation starting this autumn, where the core zone of the Supergresse area will be redesigned, where also 20 new trees will be planted. let's have a look at the traffic organization, that you have also a bit of an overview how the area looks like. So the red dot in the middle, this is the middle school, which is kind of in the core of the area. And this yellow sections, you can see, these are street sections that are going to be pedestrian zones. And the orange one in the north, this is already a pedestrian zone. So you can see in the heart, there will be a pedestrian zone, and around of this core, we have the vehicle loops, kind of, with the diagonal and the model filters in order to reduce the through traffic, or to prohibit it completely. And there will be area-wide cycling against the one-way system in the whole area, or there is actually also. So just to show that in another graphic, so when we decided implementing the Supergrätselfavoriten, we said we have to have these two phases because it's the pilot project, so we don't want to go all in the beginning. And this is just another image to make clear to you this process and how it looks like in the pilot phase, how it looks like basically right now, where we had rather this artistic floor markings. And then now we start with this structural implementation, what you can see on the right. And I also have some impressions, because I think it's also good not to have all the theory, because I think, yeah, pictures say more than all these several words. So this is the beginning, kind of 2022, where we started with the floor markings. And you can see the diagonal filters we used to have there. And you can see we only had this one bollard in the middle, where we also realized that this is not enough. And there were many car drivers who did not use the diagonal filters the way they should. This is like the intersection where you enter the Supergrätsel area, where we did this kind of like graffiti on the floor to make the car drivers aware that they enter an area which is, well, to a certain level, a bit different than the other area, since you cannot have you don't have the through traffic, and you can just have the loop. These are a few more pictures from the activities and participation events we held during the pilot phase, where we received a lot of input from the local residents during these events, in order to discuss with them how the structural implementation should look like. And I think that was actually by you, Florian, quite an interesting idea to have this plan, because the orange map you see, this is like the map of the Supergrätselfavoriten in the scale of 1 to 50. And this was used for the participation events to discuss with the kids, but also with elderly people, how aware there is a high need of redeveloping things for the structural implementation. And during the pilot phase, we also have had the first redesign to a pedestrian zone, which you can see here. And as you can see with the artistic floor markings, so this is the phase right now, and this is going to be also structural implemented then starting by end of this year, and going to be adapted, that then finally all the greening will come in, and it's not only artistic floor markings. And you have seen our first diagonal filter with only this one bollard in the middle. And in this picture, you can see how our diagonal filters look like right now. And as you can see now, we have this kind of like plant rows. But if you look to the bottom left, these are actually former trash cabins that were kind of, yeah, they were changed, and we upcycled them, and they're actually not only trash cabin, but really perfect for the greening. And as you can also see now, it's not possible anymore for the car drivers to avoid the diagonal filter. And now this problem was kind of solved by having these upcycled trash cabins for the diagonal filters. And yeah, that's about it. So you can see another picture with the diagonal filter, how this looks like right now with the floor marking. And on the right side, you see a rendering of how the pedestrian zone will look like. So you can really see there's a lot of decreasing within this area, desealing, sorry, and a lot of greening and cooling. And yeah, so we are quite happy we're quite excited to see how then when the Supergrätzel will be finished and all the greening is there, how it will look like then in the end. So that's about the Supergrätzel Favoriten as a bit of an input. And I'll hand over back to you, Florian. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Valentin. It's great to see that because there was one question on Vienna, but we will visit that in the Q&A section afterward. What TuneOurBlock did in the Urban Living Lab in Vienna and how that came about. And we will hear from Victoria Schandor from AIT, the Austrian Institute of Technology, who is also project partner in TuneOurBlock, and of Georg Wieser, my colleague at Loud Landscape Architecture and Urban Transformation. So the screen is yours.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I will give you a brief oversight over the Urban Living Lab in Lichtental, together with Victoria Schandor, who will talk about one of the formats that we tried out there in the Urban Living Lab. So what is the Lichtental Urban Living Lab is a part of the 9th district in Vienna. There is a citizen group that was established in 2021 after reading about a theoretical Supergrätzel project in Vienna that was ongoing and had some press coverage. And one of the citizens, Lena, was inspired by the idea of the Superblock and thought, hey, this is the perfect idea for my neighborhood. And then there was a contact. I don't even exactly remember how the contact got established, but basically it was during the formation of the consortium or of the research project that the idea was that this would be the bottom-up initiative to look at, because there was always the idea to look at how bottom-up initiatives can be supported. And in Vienna, in the case of the Urban Living Lab Lichtental, that meant to help them with professional planning tools and to see how a Supergrätzel, Superblock competence center could help citizens to negotiate the space between activism and city administration. So the methods that we used in the Urban Living Labs was we empowered the Agenda Gruppe to do citizen science, to do their own traffic accounting, to have legitimacy, to actually prove what they were asking for. Then we helped them with envisioning and backcasting processes, which meant that we had several meetings where we helped them establish an idea and what they could actually go for in terms of a Superblock project, which also led into the co-creative design of the planning materials that go with these ideas that came out from the envisioning processes. Then we had augmented and virtual reality workshops, which my colleague Victoria is soon going to tell you a little bit more about. Then the Lokale Agenda Gruppe, the citizen group, conducted play street formats where they were temporarily closing a local street several times. And then finally, we also had a co-creative planning workshops, which was an extensive period over 1 month, where we assisted them with these co-creative planning workshops that eventually ended in a planning exhibition that was open to the residents and the public. Just briefly on the co-creative planning materials, we were quite sure from the beginning that it would make sense to have serious planning materials. So we saw the role of of our team there, that it's better than to just demand something out of the thin air. It's better to have legitimacy, and that you can actually prove that these utopian, for some people, demands are actually plausible and possible. The way you do that is by looking at the existing traffic organization, by looking at the underground infrastructure, which is something that was only possible because it was part of the research project. This is data that you usually don't get so easily, but it's very helpful. If you're demanding trees, then you can prove that trees are actually possible on site. And if you look at all this information, and then in these co-creative planning sessions, discussions with the Agenda Gruppe Lichtental, you come up with a new traffic concept, basically from this existing traffic concept with long through routes and two-way roads, to this network of one-way streets and quite extensive pedestrian zones, which ends up in a plan here more concretely with how many trees are possible and how a future street distribution could look like. And then you, of course, have to bring this into the population, to the residents, which is one thing that Victoria will tell you a little bit more.
Thanks, Georg. So here I just jump in for a few slides. So yeah, I am from AIT, and AIT at this project had some kind of a role of bringing digital computational assessment or quick assessment tools into these workflows. So we basically developed two different kinds where we interacted with through the URL with citizens participants. One would be more like a predetermined participation, where we developed certain scenarios with our quick assessment tools, where we ran simulations, and we also brought some 3D virtual visual feedback to the table. But this was very much designed in-house or in our lab, and then previewed spaces via virtual reality and augmented reality interfaces. So it was more an informational workshop. While if you would go to the next slide, we also were quite interested in how the generation of these ideas could also happen on site with citizens. So not only the simulation results and the dashboards and the little pie charts, but also some kind of interaction with the idea creation or the visioning could be brought there. This is a special workflow or toolbox which AIT tries to provide for these workflows. So when we go to the next slide, we introduce here a tool which we call the hybrid planner, which really allows you to interact with these quick assessment tools, which are anyways used in-house. So understanding pedestrian flow, understanding solar radiation or sunlight hours on site, as well as this visual fine-tuned look of the spaces, so more like atmospheric feedback through the interaction of paper or tangible element. And that's something which we are currently working on also, but was already tested within the framework of the project. And yeah, work in progress, I would say.
Thank you, Victoria. And the tangible objects bring me to the next slide, which is part of what Laut was doing with the Agenda Lichtental in the URL, is to develop this urban planning tool. It's a bicycle-based urban planning tool. It's not only bicycle-based, it's also, of course, pedestrian-based, as almost everything bicycle-based is. It's this pop up a planning table that is sort of an evolution of the Supergrätzl plan you saw in the presentation from Valentin. It's because we were also conducting the participation process in the Supergrätzl Favoriten. We saw that sometimes the neighborhood scale can be quite overwhelming for people, and we thought that Lichtental is the perfect ground to do really in-depth co-creative planning with citizens, because you need a lot of time there, and we had this very engaged and motivated group from Agendargruppe Lichtental, and they went out over several weeks, 2 times a week at night or in the late afternoon at night, so when people were going home, to conduct these workshops. And basically you have this trailer. You arrive on site. It's in the initiatives space. It's stored there. Then you arrive on site. You're built up within 15 minutes, and then you can conduct these co-creative workshops. They have the planning material is based on the plans that you saw before, adapted for the workshops. So all these tree sites are actually actual tree potentials, and with these tools and by being in the street and very visible, the local residents very well, and kind of capture their expertise for their local neighborhood, which is very valuable. And if you do this thorough and enough, that enables you to do an exhibition that brings together all the streets of the neighborhood from the proposed Supergrätzl, and is of course a perfect communication tool towards other citizens, but also towards politicians and professional stakeholders to show actually the co-creative potentials from the neighborhood. And what was the impact of the project? I think the impact is tangible. It's not a Superblock yet, but there was the first Spatenstich. I don't know how to translate that into English, but the first opening of a construction site for one street upgrade in the Grätzl. I think the actual planning was a little bit already before the project, but that's happening now within this context of the Supergrätzl Lichtental, of the Agendargruppe, and they're also quite happy that something is happening. And then the second input is a park extension that I think is attached to the citizen initiative, and is bringing at least one traffic calm, very important street that's going to be transformed into a park. And with that, I say thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vicky and Georg.
Thank you.
There is a little bit of time. We still see your screen, Josh, but for some questions, and there was one question directly to Valentin. Martin Ignacio Zonka asks for the pilot phase in the Superblock Favoriten, how long was it? 6 months, and then you make an inquiry in the neighborhood to see if they like the change, and then with a positive answer you materialize it. I think maybe you can explain that aspect of the process. So yes and no, kind of. The pilot phase was indeed for like 6 months, more or less. But as said before, when we created the pilot phase, we already changed most of the traffic organization. This is something that we did not necessarily wanted to have in the beginning, but the traffic organization department told us that it's not possible to try it out just temporarily. So we
we had to change the traffic organization already, which means with the start of the pilot project itself, it was more or less clear that there is a Superblock to come, because the traffic organization has already changed in that sense. But still, what we used for the pilot phase was a chance to talk, of course, to the residents. So we had these artistic floor markings that you have seen before, these pink markings, and these markings are more or less like new public space and green areas, which wouldn't be there if there was no Superblock. So these areas were also quite good for the communication to talk to the residents. What are your needs? What do you want to have? How should this look like? So in that sense, the participation was not about if they want to have the Superblock or not, but rather for the structural implementation, how the Superblock should look like. And in that sense, it was a kind of a top-down Superblock, and it was more the decision by how the Superblock for the structural implementation should look like, where the participation took place. And maybe when I talk to go back to the other question that I think Marius Hufnagel had. So as I said, the Supergrätzel Favoriten was a project by the city of Vienna, but still you can also argue that there has been an impact by other research projects before. So for example, like 1 year before, there's been a research project here in the city of Vienna on a really theoretical level on how Superblocks could look like. And our department was quite interested in that. And we also gave them a letter of intent, and we were in contact with actually many of the consortium partners also. So the spark maybe of implementing Superblocks came a lot from the research projects, kind of maybe to us as a city administration. And we also brought that maybe a bit to the political decision makers, which then led to the implementation of the first Superblock. So I mean, it's not this kind of like monocausal. So it's maybe not the only reason why a Superblock came, but I would definitely say that there's been an impact by the research project, and it was one of the arguments that the implementation of the first Superblock in Vienna took place.
Yeah, thank you, Valentin. I think it's the TuneOurBlock project. When I remember when we set it up back in 2020, we were sitting together and we were thinking about how could we have a great impact. And by that time, there was not really yet any pilot project in Vienna, for example. And I think also in Berlin, there was not all these or not so many initiatives yet. And I think in some way we were all surprised by how much dynamic we observed in the cities, and that there will in Vienna, for example, we didn't, because the initial concept was like, yeah, we look at sites in Vienna, and then we see how we can facilitate a pilot project or sort of test out a pilot project. And then when TuneOurBlock then started officially in its project period, there was already a pilot project in Favorit. It was very interesting to have this project, and as you said, Valentin, to look at also all the dynamics from a theoretical perspective, which brings me to our last but definitely not least presentation from Ulrich. Ulrich Leth from the Vienna University of Technology. He and his department, they're actually the project lead of TuneOurBlock, and Ulrich will show us sort of the main project results and the key messages from the project. And because it was coming up already as a question in the chat, don't worry, we have a project website, www.tuneourblock.eu, where we publish and will publish all the findings and outcomes of our project. And also today's recording. So if you visit that site over the next weeks, you can find a lot of materials that we are putting up consecutively. And you can now listen to Ulrich, to his presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Flo. I'm happy to present the main project results, so to say the main project results, except the ones you already heard, because the results from the ULL are also some really main results. So I'll start perhaps also the way we started in the project, that we first had a look at what are we looking at in the first place. What is a superblock? Because we know there were a lot of cities already experimenting with superblocks. Obviously, Barcelona had some already in the implementation phase. There were a lot of concepts in other cities, in other countries, for example, the low traffic neighborhoods, mini Holland, traffic circulation plans. There were a lot of concepts floating around. And our first idea was to ask experts in the field of transport planning, urban planning, what they think are the main components of the superblock concept. And in a 3-stage process, a Delphi process, where we asked them again and again what should be part of a superblock definition, and then redefine it again, we came up, or they came up with the definition you can see here on the screen. Won't go too much into detail, but it entails all the key elements that the experts told us that should be part, like making impossible the through traffic and redesigning public space. So that's most of the time the two basic principles of the superblock concept. We also had a look at how to measure superblocks, not only after the implementation, so how to measure the impact of a superblock, but also before that, describing the status quo, and also, for example, setting targets, what to reach with the superblock implementation. We also heard before in the project that we did before, we had a look at how to find suitable areas for superblocks, also with an indicator driven approach. And it's also necessary to have indicators for deciding where to start first, because obviously you cannot make superblocks everywhere in the city at once. So also for this prioritizing the allocation of funds and resources, it's necessary to have quantitative data where to start. In the process, however, we also found out that, for example, Barcelona already had experience with indicators they used, but they, for example, changed the indicators over time, because they found out that they weren't that practical on the one hand. Some of the data were sometimes not available, so it's necessary to find really those indicators that help you describe the situation and to reach your targets. Exactly. For Berlin, we saw that I think Lisa already or Nicolina already told about this environmental justice atlas. So as a tool to identify areas that are in need of a change, so where the pressure for implementation is the highest, in which neighborhoods you should start. And another example also for mostly quantitative indicators is the ESU that we already saw today, the standards for superblocks. also implemented or designed by the Changing Cities, by the partner that Valentina is representing. So a set of minimum standards. There's a norm standard and the gold standard with mostly qualitative indicators, but also some quantitative measures how to how good a Superblock implementation is. When we had a look at all the different implementations around the world, or at least mostly in Europe, we found that there are basically three interlinked aspects of scale, scope, and speed that are the scale the scale is necessary or is important because one Superblock isn't a traffic concept in itself, or at least the full potential of the Superblock concept can only be understood or gathered as soon as there are more implementations or a citywide transformation. However, we also saw that until now there's little impact analysis of how a mosaic of Superblocks what results a mosaic of Superblock has, for example, on a modal split on a total city level. The second thing, the scope, that every Superblock is different, especially if you look at the Superblock as a single traffic calming measure opposed to seeing Superblocks as completely reimagining the mobility paradigm and the public space. And what we saw is that as bold and as simple the Superblock concept looks at the first glance, it gets really blurred and vague when you look at it in detail, because there are a lot of different approaches and contexts that it's used in. For example, in Barcelona, it's part of a citywide transformation. In many German cities and also in Vienna, until now, it's still more of a singular traffic calming intervention. And the third aspect being speed, that the transformation obviously needs time, but the question is at what costs, or the other way around, that the rapid transformation then means less scope, or the other way around, the slow transformation means that the scope might be more. Connected with all of those aspects, is the question of acceptance, and connected with that is the question of how politicized the whole discussion about Superblocks is. Sometimes we see that cities do local interventions that and try to frame it or do it rather depoliticized. Sometimes we see Superblocks really as political decisions and projects, and also often we see that civic engagement is the driving force of the urban transformation. For example, the Changing Cities example that we already heard about today. What we found is that neither politicization or the depoliticization is a guarantee for success. So it's always about the context. It's not a one concept that fits all. When we looked at the implementation processes, we came up with or drafted this kind of 4 phases of implementation That's obviously a simplification of the process that's taking place, but it starts with the futuring phase, where it's necessary to establish the rationale for change, why the change has to happen, and to form a vision and the political will for this change. Second phase being the planning stage, which is somehow intertwined with the third phase, the piloting phase, where you then try out the concept and refining the plan again and again. So it's a rather iterative process. And as a fourth phase, the institutionalizing phase, where the Superblock concept is becoming the new normal and replacing the current paradigm of planning. As you can see, these 4 stages were discussed quite heavily and very much in detail. In this case, in the Berlin International Superblock meeting. They have a lot more sub-stages as well. I won't go too much into detail now about that. But another interesting finding or summary about the implementation pathways is how or where to start, or how detailed to start in a city. So there's, on the one hand, the concept that you start with single blocks that you redesign, or the opposite extreme, that you start with the whole city with a regridding, then go much more detail onto the cell level to fill the grid. And then there are some intermediate solutions, like the opportunistic hybrid implementation pathway, that would be that you start where it's the easiest, and which could look a bit fragmented in the beginning, because you start where the resistance is the least, and just fill the gaps afterwards. And the ideal one probably is the rapid transformation, where the building blocks and the regridding is taking place at the same time, which obviously takes up the most resources, and also the most probably political will to do that. Coming to the last part of the presentation, the knowledge exchange was a big part of the project. We already heard that we had the international Superblock meetings, or we established the format of international Superblock meetings. The first one took place in Barcelona. We hosted it in cooperation with the city of Barcelona. You can see it was a really high level political representatives, where there are mayors from different cities, and they signed the Superblock manifesto, or this agreement between cities, that's here on the right side, where they declared their interest in basically putting people in the center of their transport planning and urban design. Jeanette Sadikan, bottom picture, was one of our key speakers, very inspiring. The second international Superblock meeting took place in Berlin. A lot of workshops, a lot of site visits. On the right side, you can see that we arrived there just in time for the opening of a new diagonal filter. The rubble still there where the bollards came in. It was great experience to see that just in the first minutes or first hours of this implementation there. And third, and until now, final Superblock meeting took place in Vienna. Also, again, a lot of workshops, a site visit to the one Superblock that's being implemented right now, and a plenary discussion with international experts, some of whom are, as I saw already, with us today in the audience. Coming to the dissemination part or the scientific dissemination up until now, there are 2 papers already published. You can find them via the QR codes here. A third one is in preparation. And with that, I'll come already to a finish. You can see here again the webpage, TuneOurBlock.eu, which currently still features the final international Superblock meeting in Vienna with impressions and the talks from there, but which will be redesigned, so you can also find all the results, the publications, some of the deliverables at least of the project there soon. Back to you, Flo.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ulrich. It's great to see from the inside-outside perspective, like what has happened. We have now 10 minutes short for some Q&A, and I can see that there were some questions already. I think we'll just go through them. There was a question from an anonymous participants. What are your insights and recommendations? What cities should do to help interested districts to realize a reasonable number of superblocks in a timely manner of a few years instead of decades? I'm not sure who wants to answer that. I would relate it back to the 4-step process, maybe. Maybe you can say something about that, Ulrich, or somebody else from our team. Lisa? Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I will try. I mean, I read the question and I thought it was kind of the ultimate question, and I don't think we have found sort of the answer to this question, because there is no sort of perfect example of how it can be done. I mean, we certainly looked a lot at Barcelona as the example where Superblocks have been taken very far and have actually become, I think you could say, the new normal, at least in parts of the city, and where an upscaling has taken place, where you can sort of say, okay, we're going beyond specific small areas and we're actually scaling it up to the level of the entire city. But even Barcelona is now facing a certain amount of backlash against that strategy. And we heard in the international Superblock meeting also from participants from Barcelona that they are really struggling now because the political wind has changed and they are no longer able to continue this rollout. So I think we have found a lot of also difficulties in this implementation process, but at least I think we can say that there are a few sort of success factors which have come up, and one I mentioned earlier, which is this idea of having a very good data set or a basis of data that proves what are sort of the KPIs, so the key performance indicators, what do you actually want to achieve, and can you prove that in the end you actually managed to achieve that effect? We have heard this from a number of cities that this is very important. I think we also heard in the international Superblock meetings a lot about sort of the administrative structures that can help to support the process. So for example, if you bring together what someone called the Superblock Avengers, so kind of a team which represents different parts of the administration and which is really focused on this process of implementing, because we found that Superblocks are difficult to implement because they bring together so many different levels of the administration. So they're not, they don't really fit into the normal processes. So bringing them together in a sort of agile teams seems to be a success factor. And then maybe a third success factor that we often heard in the international Superblock meetings was centered around political support. So that in the successful examples, you have strong political will and politicians who are willing to also face a lot of backlash and still push through with those projects. And this obviously is something that you cannot create, or you have to sort of, it has to be there. It's a precondition in a certain way. But I found it sort of very interesting how this stresses the fact that it's never going to happen without a backlash or without this sort of strong discussion in society. It's mostly going to be a political struggle, but it can be solved in a way if the politicians are willing to push through with it. So these are maybe 3 success factors that I would like to highlight.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa. That's very helpful. I think it was also for us really interesting to see how fruitful it can be for different actors in our formats, like the International Superblock meeting, to to honestly and openly talk about also struggles and success stories and different approaches. I think that was really something that we think that was a good impact of the project collectively. If there is another question from the chat, now you still have a chance to drop 1 or 2 questions, because we have the, for now, last one from Sabine Kokot. She is asking, I was starting to wonder, thinking about Alsergrund and Favoriten, so the 2 Vienna cases that we presented, they are very different from a socio-economic point of view and makeup. Do you think that the Superblock as a bottom-up, not top-down as in Favoriten tool, is useful in addressing disadvantaged neighborhoods? Have you developed any strategies that focus on engaging these neighborhoods? Is there Valentina? Yeah, sorry.
I could maybe give half of a question. Half
a question or answer?
Answer.
That's good. No.
So yeah, of course, we realized most of our activists are like white, employed, etc. So we started a new project. Actually, it just started like a month ago, together with the German Environmental Ministry, I would say. They're funding this project. And there we're going to have a look on this environmental justice atlas that we were talking about before. And we will pick areas where, for example, the pollution is the highest, or there's less trees, because those areas are quite often the areas where disadvantaged people live. And then we will work with methods of organizing. I don't know if you've heard of organizing. It's a method where we're also, how do you say Gewerkschaften in English? I don't know. Unity?
Associations?
Unions.
Unions, yeah.
And yeah, basically it means that we choose one person that goes into the areas, that knows people there, and then they will build up structures, they will set up meetings, and we can also pay those people because we have the funding of the ministry. So yeah, but we're at the very beginning with this project. I hope in like 2 years' time we're more experienced, and also for us it's the first time working in this field. So half of an answer. Maybe in 2 years more. But Georg, I think you also wanted to say something.
Yeah, having experienced both of the projects, I think it's that the top-down process is actually sometimes can be more beneficial to to disadvantaged neighborhoods, because when you experience like the people that are usually engaging within these participatory processes or are getting active more, they often have more free time, and they have sort of sometimes maybe less problems, everyday problems, than people in neighborhoods with lower socioeconomic statuses. So I think that like a top-down process is actually more suitable in those neighborhoods than in others. Even so, it is of course very necessary to engage with the people, but I don't think you can expect that there is really like initiatives on a broader level coming up like automatically in these neighborhoods. People are not very used to political processes in general. Most of them, they aren't allowed to vote because they don't have the citizenship, so they are not really as engaged in these processes that are there on the city level. In Vienna has some very interesting mechanisms already for citizen engagement, and like, you know, something like the Agenda Gruppe, for example, that's there is already an institution where citizens can go and start up Agenda Gruppe and stuff like that. And we don't see it happening so much also in Favoriten, even after 2 years with being there. You know, if there were engaged people, if there would be a critical mass of engaged people that would engage, I think they would have shown up in the neighborhood. There's just 1 or 2, but they are not an initiative.
Yeah, thank you. I think a part of the question, maybe I can add something as non-moderator, is also what Ulrich presented before, that you look at all the indicators where you are. This is something that's, when you want to improve conditions in a neighborhood, that's most often done top down or by the planning authorities. It's just in the nature of things that bottom-up initiatives, they are done by people who have the resources, as Georg said also, and the time to do stuff. I think this is also a real issue, and that you have to look at when you look at these projects. You know, where are coming projects from? I think in Berlin also some of the projects, they have been criticized as being sort of like maybe that's a wrong term, but sort of like elitist, or by people who sort of can afford to engage themselves or gentrify their neighborhoods even further. So it can also undermine a little bit the project itself. I think we need to come to a point now. There was one other question that I didn't really understand from the chat. From Frances Magria about the Superblocks for neighborhoods or green access for the city. Can I give you very briefly a speaker? We'll just have you, maybe it's better if you explain it in your own words. Ulrich, can you give her or him the speaker? I think you're muted, yeah.
Should already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, for me, it has been very interesting, all these experiences. But my question is the same that in Barcelona. Barcelona Poblenou is a neighborhood. But we have made a reflection about when we can expand the idea of we can win a space for pedestrians. This is here you show different experiences, that the most important thing is you have one space for pedestrians and for activities and for greening. But my question is the scaling up of this process. And for me, our reflection in Barcelona is we need to pass the neighborhoods, and the super blocks is important, but after we need to change the scale. And the scale, if you want to consider the scale of the city, you have to promote a network of pedestrian streets. And for me, one image of Ulrich Leth has been very interesting when he compares the experience of Barcelona and I don't know, it was Vienna or Berlin, and you can see there the change, the scale in the experience. I don't know if it was Berlin or Vienna, but you can, if you have the image, it would be interesting to show this idea that is necessary to change the scale. With a lot of super blocks, we can change the city. For the calm neighborhoods, yes, but for the city is another thing. And for me, the big question and the change, I published an article about this in Land, I have an article about this, is that if you want to change the scale, you need to promote a network of pedestrian streets at the scale of the city.
Mm-hmm.
This is the key of the change. And for me, it's interesting because you have shown with these projects different possibilities of participatory process and also the experience of different indicators if we want to an approach of bottom up, but after you need the top down also project, and for me is the question that we are analyzing in Barcelona. We have a problem because it's complicated, but the change from San Antonio in Barcelona or Poblenou is a super block with tactical urbanism, but the strong experience it started with San Antonio, and after the changes when you have Consell de Cent Street in Barcelona, you have a real change because you are deciding a main street that it was for a private car, now is for pedestrians. And now for us, our question is, we are win the space with the bicycle, but if you want to win a space for the citizens, we need pedestrian streets. And for us is what is the structure of pedestrian streets? And for me, the question is, I thought this neighborhood is super block. If you want to change the scale of the city, you need to consider the scale of a network of pedestrian streets, but for the city, not for the neighborhood. Yeah. No, this is my reflection. But I understand your project is about the experience of super blocks. This is good, but for me it has been interesting with Ulrich when he analyzed the perspective and he considered more or less a little bit the network of green of pedestrian streets. This is my question. Have you considered this in your project? Is my question.
Thank you very much. We have looked at similar strategies, and we can look at sort of complementary measures that are necessary or required with the Superblock concept, but it was not sort of part of our project to sort of enlarge that concept as such. So we were very much in the cellular approach. But when you talk about regridding, as Ulrich presented, I think that goes more into that direction. Maybe Ulrich, can you just briefly expand on this, or you're muted?
Yeah, no, I think you already summed it up. I think the last approach that we showed in this implementation process entails both those aspects. So the local level, the Superblock level, as well as the regridding. Yeah. You're muted.
So now I was muted. Thank you very much. I think that this we need to conclude now because we are a little bit over time already. But thank you very much for all your As said, there's one small hint for another event that's posted in the chat. Please have a look. Lisa and Tifo, they are having a webinar on schemes to promote sustainable mobility behavior in communal practice. And there was one question that really works well, sort of as a as sort of a final words, where Kaspar Schwarz was asking, are there any plans for future Superblock or TuneOurBlock meetings or conventions? At the time being, for the time being, we can't say for sure, but let's see what July might bring, what the future might bring. But we just need to keep internally our fingers crossed if there are some future resources that we can manifest for those initiatives. But of course, yeah, if you are interested in cooperating or collaborating on specific aspects, if you have any further questions, if you have any material that you want to share with us, please contact us. You can reach us via the project website, www.tuneourblock.eu, where we have a contact, but also all of us individually, of course. You should be able to find us somewhere on the interweb. And as mentioned, please visit the project website, which will be expanded over the next days and weeks. And yeah, thank you very much for the interesting webinar, and see you around online or in person soon. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.